All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in one of the late sessions. I know it's been a long day, but I think we're going to keep everyone's attention with some, I think, really exciting conversation here. Obviously, incredibly esteemed panel here. So I think we want to just jump right into it a little bit. And I think, look, the topic of this day is manufacturing. That's what we're here to talk about. There's a widespread agreement manufacturing is important. We actually have the poll I think we can put up from Reagan's poll, which talked about some of the numbers that we've seen with the American public that agree with this. Let's see if we can get that up there. Well, while they're working on it, we'll keep going. There's a lot of different topics that go into manufacturing. What is the challenge of manufacturing? How do we actually get back to where we need to be for the arsenal of democracy? Given that we have here an end user, acquisition official, two representatives from industry, a distinguished legislator, what I want to start with is to go down the line and ask the panel basically, what do you think is the single biggest challenge or roadblock to getting manufacturing to where it needs to be for American national security? And Senator, if we can start with you.
Well, I'm going to start with my own visual aid.
It's great. Professional senator, he has his own chart here.
This is a chart that Jim Inhofe created when he was at the Armed Services Committee. And basically what it shows is the time from concept to an operating prototype of aircraft and automobiles. And it goes back into the 60s and 70s, and you see the line for commercial aircraft and military aircraft are pretty similar. They're right around 4 or 5 years. Something happened in the 70s. This is the trajectory of the time to develop a military aircraft versus a commercial aircraft. So the first part of my presentation is I have 3 Ds for you today, but the first one is delay. This is one of the biggest constraints is why does it take so long? Is it process? Is it requirements creep? Is it, what are the provisions that makes it, and frankly, at this point in the world, we can't afford to be even close to this graph. We've got to be able to react to things within months, let alone decades. So I think one of the first biggest barriers in terms of production and acquisition is time. And so I am anxious to hear from some of my colleagues on the panel about whether this line is improving. Bill Plan at the Pentagon thinks it's improving. I'm not so sure, but that's what I think one of the most important things we need to talk about is time, because that's what we don't have in today's conflict situation.
Dan?
Well, I guess you still a little bit of my thunder there, but I would echo the fact that things just need to move faster, and I think that part of the reason for that is that not all the incentives are aligned, and sometimes they're counterintuitive. And I've been around a lot of different programs, different industries. If you want more of something, you should incentivize it. If you want less of something, you should tax it or regulate it. So if you want more speed, if you want faster development cycles, you actually need to incentivize that as a criteria in how you do it. You need to promote and pay people based on the programs getting through faster to get to successful outcomes. And so I absolutely think that time and speed are the things we need most of, and we need to create the right incentives for them.
General?
I'd use Senator King's same display that he had. I think it's process change is what we got to get after. I think that's the biggest challenge that we have. And I'll give you 3 examples. I'll really start with back in 1960, DOD had 11 big pots of money, and we didn't have all these programs. We could move money around and we could spend it, year after year. Now we're up to 18 or 1900 different program lines. So especially when you're talking about, the first thing I think we need is agile funding. I really do think we need to be more agile in our funding, especially when you're talking about UAS, counter-UAS, and EW, and we know it spins very rapidly, and we have to be able to respond to that. Second thing that I think we have to do as users is change how we also put our requirements out. And we don't need 30-page documents. I'll give you, one example we've done with our network is put out a characterization of need. We have a lot of amazing companies that can come in and help us do these things and change for us. We just need to let them go and tell them what they can do, and be more rapid about doing that. And I think that the hardest thing is going to be with process change. I also think, and we've been talking about this a lot in the Army, is we're also going to have to stop buying some things that we know are not going to be war-winning, down the road. And that means you can find better value for your money and spend your money on the things that you know are going to make the biggest difference on the battlefield. So I would say it's process change.
I think that's a great point. I'll just pick up on something that the general said. I think for us, we've got to think about the design. I'll pick up on what you said, Senator, on your chart there, which is I think we design to the highest level of requirements, to your point, General, and that takes time. It's a very high bar. I think we got to get back to a more modular design philosophy, get it out into the field, and then continue to iterate and upgrade in the field as we learn more about the threats, about the threatscape, about what our adversaries are doing. I would say that's sort of number one. And then number two, and it's not something we do terribly well as an industry, which is design for manufacturability. We design for performance, obviously because of the threats that are out there. We don't necessarily design with manufacturability in mind. Why do something with 5 parts when you can do it additively in 1? So the more we can continue to design for manufacturability, the faster you can continue to ramp up the production phase of any program.
Well, I agree with everything that my teammates up here have said. I kind of come at this problem from a couple of different lenses. So I've been in the department now for about 18 months. Before that, I spent 13 years at Apple, which is a place that's all about disruption and scale. I also been in the military for about, part-time at least, for about 28 years, and spent a lot of my career living back and forth throughout Asia. And the first thing I'd say is, I just want to foot stomp and underscore, we simply cannot meet the strategic imperative before us that we've been talking about for the last couple of days unless we're able to fully leverage the incredible power of our commercial tech sector. This is what Ash Carter stood DIU up to get after, and we're now focused on the bridges that have been built. It's pretty amazing to see the collection of folks from the tech sector who are here now, and build on the experiences that we have now, proving that you can solve real military problems the way that General George is talking about with commercially derived tech, to now doing that with the focus, speed, and scale that we need in order to deliver. So I think, as I think back from my experience in the tech world, where we do see transformation at scale, massive innovation, often with capabilities that put something from a concept to 100 million of something under a tree within less than 6 months, that there are just a few things that really drive that. The first one is relentless demand, which from billions of consumers around the world, the enterprises that serve them, which doesn't necessarily mean that we know exactly what the demand will be shaped like, but we know it will be there. And then second, massive competition also from around the world that forces innovation, forces investment in that innovation, because if you don't do that, you lose. And in our more traditional approach, defense procurement, we really have neither of those two things. And instead, we've got something that looks a lot more like the traditional 5-year plans from the old Soviet system, which the Chinese have actually spent a whole lot of time themselves trying to get away from because it doesn't work. And then we make it even worse by not even being able to consistently pass the budgets to do that. So my recommendation would really be to address directly both demand and competition. First, we need a much more clear, consistent, flexible demand signal. It doesn't have to be exact clarity of demand for the next 5 years, but in fact, if you give exact definition and just port more money against it, then you actually don't incent the kind of behaviors that you want. Instead, for those major areas of tech change, we should provide a consistent demand signal of the critical areas we'll be buying in, rather than specific programs, areas like AI, autonomy, space, biotech. And then I like to call those portfolios of record instead of programs of record. Then we should give the flexibility to move within those, so that General George can change from this one to that one as the tech evolves and the companies delivering it evolves. And then I think we've got to have also enough budget consistency to be able to deliver against that and give the confidence that we will. And then second, we need to use that flexibility to open up the aperture so that competition can force the innovation and investment. That means bringing the non-traditionals in and alongside the more traditional players, wherever possible, in hardware as well as software, making it easier for them to participate and compete. In some cases, the best tech's going to come from there, but in every single case, that will drive competition, that will drive innovation and performance. DIU works everybody from large traditionals all the way to brand new startups, we work wherever possible, helping them collaborate skills. So that can come from anywhere, but competition helps to drive it. And so this is what we're after at DIU. We're just getting started using the tools that Congress has provided us, and working with our partners like General George here, hoping to get an opportunity to talk a little bit more about some of the specifics of what we're after. And I'll just close by saying there is a huge opportunity right now for this incoming administration to partner with Congress and do something big on this.
Senator King, you wanted to chime in there?
Well, everybody's been talking about demand. It would be nice if Congress could pass a damn budget on time. I mean, continuing
I was going to say that,
resolutions-
sir.
Continuing resolutions are just terrible. They cost the Defense Department something like $5 billion a month. It's pitiful that we can't, there's no earthly reason we couldn't have passed a budget on September 30th. And by the way, in my little state of Maine, we had a 2-year budget. I don't know why we can't have a 2-year budget. Also, the federal government has no capital budget. We're paying cash for assets that are going to last 50 years. So I think there's some real significant improvements that could be made, but it would start with just pass the damn budget on time, and then you'd have a steady demand signal throughout the whole system, and people could understand how they could invest and get involved in these kinds of long-term projects. So that's a simple solution. Through some oversight, I'm not in charge over there, so we'll keep going. We're going to pass another continuing resolution next week, till March.
You think that's going to happen out through March? That's the plan?
I absolutely don't know, but there's no reason that we can't do this. Have negotiations over the top line, have the Appropriations Committee work out the distributions, and go from there. It ought to be pretty straightforward. By the way, this isn't the fault of the Appropriations Committee. They work very hard. They go through all these numbers. They have that meeting after meeting after meeting. They do all their work, and then it never happens. Pretty frustrating.
So one of the themes I think you might have heard through coming down here, and I should say you can use the app to send questions in. Please don't wait to send them in. I got a little thing here that'll pop it up for me. We'll try to work them in as we're going through the conversation. I think one of the themes that you heard, and certainly something we talked about ahead of time, is speed and the need to figure out ways to be able to go not just faster in terms of actually putting things out, but in terms of our processes and how to actually change things. And General George, I wanted to ask you this, which is, if there isn't, let's call it holistic, full-up budget acquisition reform from where you stand, can you get at the speed that you need as the end user? Or do you think there needs to be fundamental shifts in how this process works?
So what we've proposed is, and I know there's been PPBE reform and all of this, is that we've proposed in the Army that we actually focus on the things that we know change very rapidly, which is UAS, anything uncrewed, countering uncrewed systems, and EW. I mean, we're seeing that, and Ukraine is seeing that. We're seeing that everywhere on how fast things are changing. And so I think that that's one area. And when we didn't, if you had flexible funding and you had the ability, the other part of, besides putting us behind on a continuing resolution, if you have to make rapid changes and you don't have a budget and you need to increase quantities or you need to make changes, you can't do that either. So there's real operational impacts. So I think that we just should take this at that level and try to do that first. I'd be all for, we are going to portfolio-based management in all of those systems. We're buying capabilities. Our very first transforming and contact brigades got infused with a certain amount of tech from one company, and the one we're getting ready to do in January, all the UAS and the counter UAS and the EW systems are different because they're better. On the UAS side, they're longer range, they're cheaper, they're just better systems. And I think, cost curve is an important thing for us as well. And when we can start buying those things at that level, and then I would go back to something that Chris talked about, we also have to look for our bigger systems buying modular. So rather than building a system that has everything built in, active protection, counter UAS, all of that, you can build the big system and then be able to change out those modules because all of that is going to change. And we just have to design those things different. That will allow us to be a lot more flexible moving forward. So I think it's a combination of things.
Senator King, is there going to be appetite on the Hill for that kind of reform? And we've talked for years about doing pools of money so that the services have more flexibility.
I think there is, because we're coming to realize again, the necessity of agile. My high school football coach said he wanted us to be mobile, agile, and hostile. And that's probably not a bad description for the Army either.
Yep.
But I think there's an increasing realization that time is absolutely essential. I mean, we've learned that in Ukraine. They're doing generations of drones in matters of weeks, and we have to do that. And by the way, one of the places we've really been slow is on directed energy. And directed energy budget in the defense budget over the past 3 years has fallen in half. To me, that's absolutely crazy. We're shooting down Houthi $20,000 drones with $2 million missiles. Directed energy, that's a perfect use of directed energy. We're now starting to deploy these directed energy weapons, but it ought to be happening a lot faster. So I think the idea of allocating money for a purpose rather than for a particular item is a much better way to proceed, and then that will give you more flexibility in order to acquire the weapons that are necessary for today's conflict, not last month's or last year's.
Can I mention one other thing on that, Aaron, just because Senator brought up directed energy. The other thing that we're really focused on is actually, typically we built something, we took it to the test range, then we said, okay, we'll take it back to the lab. So we're actually doing that. As you know, we send directed energy and we're sending it out to the Middle East. We're sending prototypes out there. Somebody will say, eventually they're going to be 5x better. Right now they're 3x better. That's better capability that we're getting with our soldiers that are out there. We're also finding out, what does the heat do? What does the humidity do when we take it out in the Pacific? What does the cold weather do if you're in the eastern plains in Europe? And we're getting that kind of feedback. We get the best feedback from our formations when they're actually using it. And again, I think that's a process change. And what that's allowed us to do is to start pulling things left and basically say, hey, we can get this quicker.
Can I maybe build on that for a second? So there's been, so first of all, Congress entrusted DIU this past year with a pretty significant uptick in our budget to just shy of $1 billion. And there's been a lot of talk about that, a lot of focus on it. And what's been a little bit lost in that discussion of the budget, it's probably the most talked about, 0.1% of the defense budget out there. But what's been a little bit lost in the discussion is what I think is actually the most important thing about it, which is the flexibility that's within that budget. So for the first time ever, and actually the first time anywhere in the department, we have the ability with the majority of that funding to go all the way from that initial prototyping all the way through to fielding to initial fielding to operational units. Now, we don't scale anything because that's what the service does, but that puts me in a position to be a completely different kind of partner for General George, so that we're able to help to facilitate those initial deployments. And so what that means, I'll give you maybe a concrete example. I think I saw General Jim Rainey here from AFC a second ago. I don't know where he went. Oh, there he is, Jim. So for example, company level UAS, they see a need based on what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Gaza. He writes a directed requirement, we need to go do this, and now we can work together on fielding a prototype really quickly in the same way that we always would have, with maybe a few $1 million to help make that happen. But then we're in a position now to help with the initial fielding at maybe the tens of millions, but also now moving forward to initial fielding out to operational units, so they can start testing those things, working with them in contact, where appropriate, or in operational units. And then in the second year, we can continue to help as they've now moved their more flexible funding to help support that, and hopefully, without getting ahead of either the current president's budget or a future president's budget, they're in a position then also to really scale those things in the third year once they've proved them out and meant they work. That's kind of how we're leveraging our flexible funding now, which is a brand new thing that Congress has given us to be able to help get after this. And my perspective is that we need to be doing a lot more of that in places like DIU, but that General George should have that flexibility too.
Dan, let me ask you, so let's say that there's more flexibility that goes into the budget, the Army is able to go out and test these things in the field, JU is helping to test in the field, and they say, hey, this thing that you guys made for us, it works pretty well, but we think we want to do this, this, this. From where you stand, how do you take that feedback and then be able to quickly actually get that around instead of it taking 4 years for the feedback to get fed in, run through the process you guys have, get it approved up the chain, et cetera, et cetera?
One of the good and bad things about two hot wars going on is people are innovating very quickly, and we're learning things in the field that we would otherwise take years to go through a requirements process on. So the crucible of the wars are perversely sort of driving innovation at a faster pace. That's driving drones, it's driving counter UAS, and it's driving other things. I think the way that we approach that, but a bit of an evangelist for this because I think it's a very successful model, is to be agile in your processes and your manufacturing techniques and your design platforms to be able to meet that kind of demand as it comes into you and as you get that rapid feedback. So as an example, we do an awful lot of additive manufacturing. If we do solid rocket motors or our liquid rocket engines, about 80% of the content that is entailed in those is additively manufactured. Mm-hmm. Now the advantage of that is you can iterate very quickly on a design, and complexity is nearly free. So on a combustion chamber that's designed to handle up to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, if you want to change how the cooling channels happen in that article, you can 3D print something else pretty rapidly, put it now through another qualifications process, and in a matter of weeks, have a different configuration that you would be able to use. An example of innovation on the solid rocket motor side, and solid rocket motors are a real issue for industry right now, is that we've been working with our partners Raytheon on different types of designs for solid rocket motors. And they've come into us and they've said, hey, we've got something, we've got a drone application out there, we need to figure out how to shoot these things down, we've got an idea for an engine. And our teams have gone and over the weekend designed that in the 3D coding software that we use. We've sent it off to our plants in Youngstown, Ohio. They've printed those articles, which means they've welded up the metal to send that back to us. We've done post-processing on it, and we've had that back out on the stand in 29 days. And we've done that on a couple different programs with Raytheon now, and that's really exciting to see that level of innovation happening to be able to meet and respond to something that's happening in the field. And then if they say, hey, that's not quite it, we got the feedback from the Army that wasn't exactly what we wanted. We wanted some more range, we wanted a different flight profile, we wanted something else. It doesn't cost you years of development or acres and acres of tooling or anything else. You can just jump right back into the 3D printers, change that design, see if it works or not, get it on the stand, and then field that capability. So,
by the way, on 3D printing, I think every Army depot and every ship should have a 3D printer. And when we're buying platforms, we should be buying the IP so that we can print the parts. We don't have to send anybody to get a part, and if something goes wrong in the field,
we're actually doing that, Senator. We just had a big conference. We're actually down to the tactical units, and they're in 20-foot containers, and figuring out where we're going to put these. Obviously, what the other thing it helps is on the battlefield, you want to have very low signature. So whatever you're doing, obviously moving things is very costly. So we're trying to push all of that forward. Long lead time parts has been a challenge for us as well. And so, we have cases where we've taken parts that cost us $20 previously, and we're printing them for pennies, 12 cents. And we do it very rapidly. And so I think it's also going to be a lot for our operational readiness.
Can I maybe build on that advanced manufacturing point a little bit on what Dan was talking about? Is this actually an area that we see enormous opportunity? And actually I've got something that I'll kind of announce that we're going to be doing here. When I have an opportunity to work with a whole lot of super innovative companies these days who are incredibly advanced in their hardware and software, or hardware and software integration. And when I talk to those guys, it feels a lot like the same kind of level of capability, energy, and talent that I would have had kind of at the best of Apple, but focused in maybe kind of a defense kind of space or a dual use kind of space. when we have the conversation with some of those companies, particularly the ones that are kind of still in the early or mid-ramp of their growth curve, about the operational side of their business, it's not kind of the same thing, right? Because they're just not there yet. At the same time, there are these incredible companies in everything in advanced manufacturing, from kind of digital engineering all the way through to 3D printing and everything in between. A lot of them actually having come out of the space arena, but in other areas as well, and some incredibly capable companies. And they are looking for a lot more places to deploy that capability so that they can grow. And what we're now going to be doing is through something called Blue Manufacturing, which I've sort of talked about a little bit before. We're going to be helping to bring those two groups together so that they can both scale on our stuff. And that'll be helping smaller companies, but I think it'll also be useful for some larger companies as well in some places. Plus, some of those larger companies will be able to participate in providing that as a service to others. This is something Dan and I have talked about. And so in January, we'll be putting out the requirements effectively, or the solicitation for to be included in relevant categories of advanced manufacturing, and for companies that meet the quality and capability standards, but also basic adversarial capital, cybersecurity, the other things that we need, supply chain, in order for us to be able to work effectively with them, or for others to be able to work with them. And then we'll also be putting out for the marketplace capability to be able to help match those folks up. Now, this isn't about us buying stuff directly. It's about us helping to make that happen, to help facilitate the development of that marketplace so we can go much faster to get to the kind of scale and at the speed that we need.
Chris, how would that help you? Would that help you, what we just discussed? Or is it simply RTX is, you guys are the big kahunas and you're all set?
No, Aaron, of course it would help. Doug and I have talked about this, and we're out looking all the time for, new suppliers, innovative suppliers to help us ramp. We're not coming to this with a not invented here type of attitude. That's not going to work. I mean, let's go back to the title of the panel here. Can we build again? Hell yeah, exactly. We can build again, and we are. And there are certain areas where we're not ramping as fast, but we're bringing in automation, connected machines, anything that we can to continue to ramp to meet the needs. If you walk around here like I have today, in your meeting with service chiefs, combatant commanders, they need our stuff. So we can talk about the 5-year plan, the 10-year plan. They need our stuff today. They need Patriot batteries. They need Standard Missile 3, Standard Missile 6. All things that are in the pipeline today that we're continuing to invest. Counter UAS. You heard the general talk about this. Doug and I were part of a group at DIU this week talking about counter UAS. We've ramped up our Coyote platform from a monthly rate by 5x this year. We're going to double between the end of this year and the year after. And that's an Army program of record. We then went and developed and fielded a naval variant in 9 months, with taking into account all the things you would need to do to account for, instability on the sea and whatnot. We are continually iterating and looking for ways to increase the speed and velocity at which we design and manufacture. Just to go back to the sentiment on the panel here, there is a palpable urgency in industry to continue to ramp to meet the needs of our customer.
So somebody asked this in the audience questions, which is, I'm sorry, can you actually have something?
Well, the word constraints is in the title. What are the constraints? And something I'm surprised hasn't come up yet is manpower, workforce.
There we go.
Every business in Maine is looking for workers, and that includes the shipyards. And we need to really be thinking about that. The government needs to be thinking about that. We not only need to be funding facilities at a major defense production, but we need to be talking about parking and daycare and housing. All of those talk about constraints. At Bath Iron Works, which is a major employer in Maine, they have people come from out of state, and then they can't find a place to live that they can afford. So all of those things are interrelated, and I think if we're talking about constraints, the workforce constraint is a national problem. I assume it's a problem in other states. Every business that comes to my office is short of people, whether it's truck drivers, professionals, nurses. Our principal hospital's down 500 nurses. So this is something that we really need to address as a country in terms of training and bringing people along and engaging them at a younger age. You guys, Pratt Whitney,
Yeah.
have done a really good job working with the community college and the high schools in the region where they are, that has enabled them to add people. But boy, nationwide, this is a huge, if you're talking about constraints, workforce is one of the biggest.
Senator, couldn't agree more. Obviously, we've got the plant in North Warwick at Pratt, and we've had to continue to train, develop curriculum, to your point, to make sure that we've got folks with the right skills. But it's the reason I mentioned automation. And we've added 2 million hours of automation within just our Raytheon business unit over the last several years. So we've got to continue to find ways to automate, to have people be able to operate 2 and 3 and 4 machines as opposed to one person for each machine. We've got to work around those constraints, and automation is a key enabler to making that happen.
We got some, I think we have some examples of that. We're doing that for the organic industrial base when we're talking about round production. You basically have the same workforce, but if you've automated it, and you also, some of this is stockpiles and having the right things that are ready to go, you can scale your production. There's a lot of companies that are out there doing that.
In this economy, you're not putting people out of work. That helps politically.
Same number of people, for example, at some of our organic industrial bases, but you have them, Radford, we're doing the same thing down there at one of those plants. So it's the same number of people, you just have a lot more production capacity because it's automated.
Exactly.
But I kind of on that point, and I've seen this happen in other industries as well, and yes, we need to crank out more engineers, we need to crank out more qualified techs and machinists and everything else through our systems, but a lot of that comes by incentivizing those people to want to come work at your company as well. That means good benefits, well-paying jobs, good career opportunities, people they like to work with on hard problems. And good Americans want to come into those jobs. We want to keep creating those for them.
You all read my mind because that was actually the question that we had from the audience. That was perfect, sir. Thanks for setting that up. One question on the man force, though, is even if, let's say, the force that we have right now, the workforce, can do 3 times the work that they're able to do through automation, through different processes, et cetera, is that actually still enough to get where we need to be? Or does there need to be, aside from the changes in processes and additive manufacturing, et cetera, which helps speed that along, does there still need to be an influx of manpower to be able to meet the requirements that we have coming?
I'll take a swing at that first. I mean, I think I can give examples. Some of the things that we're doing now, again, many decades ago, we had a lot of companies that were a part of, our industrial base. We had dual-use technology. They made different things. I mean, our infantry squad vehicle is a good example. Right now it's on the Chevy Colorado chassis, and it also does very well for us. So, I mean, I think moving to those kinds of things helps. I think for all of us to be able to, to do things at scale. So.
Well, part of it is the requirements. I mean, my friend Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, used to come to Armed Services Committee meetings with a stack of papers this high that was the spec for a new handgun. It was literally 18 inches high. So part of it is...
I agree with you. That's characterization of needs. We got to be very simple and straightforward.
And if off the shelf will work,
then we should buy it. I mean, we're doing that for UAS. The UAS that we bought, again, for the first unit and the second and third are different. People understand what we need. They're out with us, and they're producing it. So we can...
Actually, maybe 2 different things. First, just on this needs versus requirements point. This is actually really at the heart of the way that DIU tries to approach the problem, starting with the need rather than the requirement. I mean, if you'd started by asking the consumer what they wanted, in a new smartphone in 2006 or 7, you would have gotten a flip phone that you could play Snake on faster with a toothbrush out the side or something. You would not have got an iPhone.
Right.
Instead, it was sort of like, what's the human problem we're trying to solve? How does technology help to solve it? Which is why we're embedding deeply with warfare, with the combatant commands as well as with the service to say, what's the need? How to bring the technologists in to help solve that problem with tech, rather than telling them, hey, go build me this widget with a 1,000-page thing. It's like a 10-page PowerPoint of how you think you can help to solve the problem. And now let's get something real and start talking about it. So that's one thing. Second thing is, I want to come back to your workforce point. And whether we, even after we do all the amazing things we'll do from a process standpoint and advanced manufacturing, whether we need more talent of all different kinds across the system, the answer is hell yes. Would be my answer, and that's true for all the defense-related capability. It's true for the entire tech sector. And as you think about everything across that value chain, from high-end chips to the testing equipment to the people who are developing apps that are part of that software system, we need a whole broad set of folks that are way more involved, skilled, and earlier. And start earlier in the education system to help develop that. So that's a huge need. I think that the government's going to need to help play a role in helping to stimulate that in the right ways, and we have done that at other times in our history. And I think the private sector needs to get much more active in helping to stimulate that. And one other thing I'll just throw out there, because I just can't help it, is I actually think one of the places is an enormous source of the kind of talent that we're talking about here that is incredibly operationally capable, technically savvy, high integrity, hardworking, and willing to get after it, is all my fellow veterans that are coming out of the force in various places. And we'd love to keep them in, but the ones who get out, a lot of them should be going to these spaces, and we should be making it easier and easier and easier for them to go do this, because they're great jobs and we need them.
Yeah.
Except for we want to keep them. We want
That's fair. I was going to say, we've got different requirements.
I would say, Aaron, just to build on a couple of things that Doug said. One, we got to open the aperture as an industry about who we want to bring into the supply base.
Yeah.
I think you had mentioned that before. There are people in other industries that we have to, again, be more flexible about adding to the defense supply base. And then two, I would talk about co-production as another outlet to add capacity, manpower, and enable the ramp. So, again, partnering with our allies. If you just think about some of our large programs. I was in Poland a month ago. We've got 9 polar suppliers on Patriot. We've got co-production on GEM-T in Germany. We've got a number of programs where Kongsberg on NASAMS out of Norway.
And they're on DIU contract.
They're on DIU contract. So again, capable partners internationally with our allies, again, continues to add capacity and enable us to come up the ramp.
I just want to maybe build on, because I'm super passionate about this one. I think that that adds capacity that we need. Partnering with our allies, the partners we and working with them. So first of all, that all this technology, right? What's inside of here, we talk a lot about kind of the assembly pieces that happen in China, but what people don't talk about nearly as much is all the guts that are inside of these, the components from all these kinds of technology come from all of our allies and partners. Those friends are incredibly capable. We've got to take advantage of that from a capacity standpoint and also from a market standpoint. So as we work with those other allies and partners, that also creates a greater market for our companies to be able to go play in that world, and it also invites more of them in, which is, again, that's more competition as well, which creates a lot more of the incentives that we need. So this is a huge area. It's one of the reasons that one of the central parts of our strategy at DIU right now has been about partnering with the Brits, or the Australians, or the Singaporeans, the Japanese, the Indians. In fact, my deputy director was just in Japan this last week launching 2 challenges jointly with the Japanese. That's just a start. We've got to use this to help scale all the way up to co-production. I completely agree.
The only thing I'd say there, though, is I'd be sensitive to like some of these places in the U.S. that have been left behind a little bit on that kind of thing. And like we've got a 3D Center of Excellence in Youngstown, Ohio now, and that was help funded by the federal government as well as the state of Ohio to create what essentially are some of the most technologically advanced world-class 3D printing centers for complex metal parts that spin at 65,000 RPM, combustion chambers that handle 6,000 degrees in the center. And that's being done here, and it's really important that even as we work with the allies, and I agree we need to do that, but there are vast swaths of the country where people could use those jobs too. And we should be developing in those areas, we should be developing those work pools and creating those nice high paying
It's a bit of an and, not an or.
Yeah.
That's right.
Dan, but I do think you're starting to see, again, to the Senator's point, labor continues to be an issue. And I think this just adds, we're talking about adding additional sources to what is a very stretched supply chain, which is what I think co-production can help unlock, but I think your point's a good one.
Well, I agree with both of you, but I kind of take a more offense view of that, which is I think the opportunity for those capabilities and the kinds of companies that you're talking about, Dan, is I think there's opportunity there, because part of what we can do through these kinds of arrangements is help to introduce them to markets where they can get more scale off of what they're doing in places like Ohio.
The incoming administration has talked a lot about immigration reform and talked about deportation of individuals as well. Is there any concern that that kind of movement of people, whether it's restricting them coming into the country or having some of them exit, is going to impact the workforce?
We need to control the southern border, and we need to rationalize the immigration process and enable legal immigration. These are people that we need. These are people from all over the world with talent. We're one of the only countries in the world that people want to break into. Did you ever think of that? So we have to get control of the southern border first, and then, the first year I came to the Senate, we passed the comprehensive immigration bill by 67 votes in the Senate, led by John McCain and others, and it never came up in the House, so it never happened. But this has to be part of the package. I mean, we need to enable legal immigration for all this talent that wants to come here. I mean, I think President Trump said at some point something that I've said: we should be stapling green cards to college diplomas. If we've got talented people who are coming to this country for education, we want to stay here and use that education for our benefit, not to go back to someplace else. So I agree with you. That's a piece of this. It starts with the border, but then we need to go on to a more comprehensive solution to the overall problem.
Chris, I want to throw one out at you. We're here in...
You're smirking, so it's a
It's a good sign.
I'm bracing myself.
It's a good smirk. So we're in California. You can look at...
I noticed none of you guys wanted to chip in on immigration.
I thought you handled it beautifully.
So we're here. You can look at the advertisers who were supporting the Reagan Foundation, and it's a lot of tech companies. It's all the new entrants, as they called. And some of those new entrants have talked about manufacturing, that they've kind of got a different angle on it, whether it's additive manufacturing, new technologies. And in some ways, they've talked about companies such as yours as kind of being maybe stuck in the mud or behind the times. How do you respond to the idea from some sectors that a prime doesn't necessarily know how to provide what the Department of Defense needs in 2024?
Well, a couple thoughts. And I'll reiterate what I said before. If you look at the systems we have at play today, Ukraine, Red Sea, Israel, and the like, again, I think the demand is incredibly strong for our products. People want more of them, and they want them faster. So that's sort of point one. I'd say point two would be, maybe I'll quibble with your characterization a little bit as a strict defense prime. Almost half of our business, if you think of Pratt & Whitney and Collins Aerospace, is commercial aerospace, based. And in commercial aerospace, you're constantly investing at risk. You've got to get products out fast. You've got to design with upgrades in mind. You've got to constantly be innovating. I can give you a number of examples where we've taken a commercial innovation and ported that over into defense and done it, very successfully. So those types of commercial principles and mindset exist within the company, today. I gave you the example before on the defense side about ramping on Coyote. To the general's point before, we're seeing things out in the field and we're iterating on upgrades, both hardware and software, to react to the countermeasures, that we're seeing, operating in denied environments, as an example. I think the folks that you mentioned, the new entrants, the disruptive folks, look, I think competition's a great thing. I think at times they're competitors, at times there are partnership, opportunities. So I agree with the need for speed, and I think I can give you a number of examples where we're doing just that. Again, I think the characterization and composition of our business is just different than a traditional defense prime, which gives us a bit of an advantage. But we're always looking to find ways to partner with folks to provide the absolute best solutions, to the general and our customers.
Doug, how do you help get some of those newer entrants up to the ability to produce at scale? Because that is the big hump that we're all talking about, is we need more of everything right now.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the thing that they need most of all is a consistent demand signal that allows them to make the investments and their investors to make the investments that need to, that they need to get after it. First they need a chance, and we've already talked about that. And then we need reference cases of successes that people can point to and see where that success goes. It's interesting, there's a lot of talk about capital out there, and the reality is that capital is not the scarce resource here. There's actually a ton of capital, and every dollar that DIU winds up putting into something, there's anywhere from 5 to 10 to sometimes 50 or 100x of that investment that comes in, which we need to come in so that those companies can expand their capacity and go scale. We also need them to be able to talk about it. And so short answer is the most important thing that we can do is get reps and sets of successes out there and be the kind of counterparty that allows investment to consistently go in there. Now, that doesn't mean that every single company is going to succeed or that every one of these things is going to wind up playing out, because that's not how it works in Silicon Valley, right? These are companies and investors who are used to taking risks, but what they need is they need to have enough clarity of that scale demand that's going in these critical areas of investment with enough of a chance that it's worth taking that risk so that they can take the risk on our stuff.
One thing we haven't really talked about, and we're somehow coming up at the end of this, is the supply chain security specifically. We see what happened with Calio a couple of weeks ago where China cut them off, and then earlier this week, or last week, China threatened to cut off some key minerals. I guess maybe the way to do this is just say, how do we actually get to getting that, balancing the cost of trying to bring it all onshore?
I was just trying to figure out how to get to that, and you asked the question.
This is good. We got a good thing going.
Brad Smith talked about this earlier today. We're in a hot war right now with China, Russia, and Iran. It's in cyber. The attack on the telecommunications, Assault Typhoon, most serious attack on a telecommunications system in this country in our history. You know what? We have no deterrence. Nobody's afraid of us in cyber. Our whole defense strategy is based upon the concept of deterrence. If you attack us, we're going to make you pay. Except in cyber, we're still waiting for a response to the Sony hack. We have no response. There has to be, and this is something the president could do, it wouldn't cost a dime, a declarative statement that if we're attacked in cyberspace, there will be a concrete and costly response. That's something that could be done next week. It should have been done a long time ago, and it just drives me crazy that we take these attacks. If you're sitting in with Xi Jinping and he said, should we interfere with the American elections? You say, yeah, why not? If we get caught, nothing's going to happen. It's cheap. Or should we attack their telephone system? And we don't know the extent to which they have embedded malware into our telephone system or our financial system or our transportation system. So, boy, to the extent that you all have any role to play, we've got to develop a comprehensive and clearly defined deterrent strategy in cyberspace. Otherwise, this hot war that we're engaged in, we're just going to continue to lose. We cannot patch our way out of this problem.
Amen to that, for sure. I'd also, on the question of the supply chain, absolutely we should be thinking about that, and we should be designing to account for it. So if you have a rare earth mineral and the only place you can get that is out of a very remote region of China, and you want to build an entire piece of your infrastructure on that, that's crazy. You shouldn't do it until you develop that supply base that has that, or you design around it with something else. And I don't think we do that all the time. In the consumer world, we've been able to get away without doing it because we've been able to go to the marketplace. But in the defense world, you have to anticipate a scenario at some point in the future where you do not have access to that region or to those supplies, or somebody will shut them off. We do that proactively ourselves. Iranians can't fly jets that we provided for them because we won't give them the replacement parts. we should think about how that might get flipped on us, and we need to account for that in the industrial base.
Yeah, I just maybe build on, so this is a big deal, obviously, and we work with some, including, so Calio is a DIU portfolio company. We've worked with them since they first got into the defense space. We've been helping them actively with how to handle the situation and find alternative sources of supply. But this is something I think is also, it's important for us to think about which are the critical, which critical areas of capability and which critical parts of this value chain do we need to have either here or friendshored somewhere in order to get after it? And so one, for example, that I think is an enormous area of opportunity where we're spending a lot of time is batteries. So historically, in the Department of Defense, our approach to batteries has been incredibly bespoke, where we end up spending a huge amount of money on incredibly complicated bespoke batteries that only go in the one thing. Well, batteries go in everything. And meanwhile, there's this $100 billion battery industry out there that includes some very, very, very capable companies that are located right here in the United States that we need to be drafting off of in order to have much more standardized approach to batteries in far more of our capabilities. Now, that's not going to be possible in everything, but in a lot of the capabilities, especially the new ones that we're now designing, we can build those with a much more standardized battery approach, and we can help to facilitate that being developed in the United States so that we're not dependent in the ways that we are in so many areas.
By the way, I
Batteries
think
are the real Green New Deal.
I think to Dan's point, it's caused all of us to go deep into the supply chain, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and figure out where are you getting your raw materials, where are your suppliers getting their raw materials. I mean, we saw this with what happened with titanium coming out of Russia, huge impact in aerospace. So I think it's caused all of us to proactively go and make sure. And in some cases, it drives higher cost as you're going and standing up second and third sources in other less volatile areas where you can. But it's something I think we've all had got some religion on this and have had to go really, really deep to understand where all the risks are, deep, deep, deep in the supply chain.
We have about a minute and a half left, so I'm going to just ask if we can close with kind of a lightning round. We're going to start with Doug and then just kind of run our way back here. One of the topics that's been running throughout this conference is the question of the DOGE office and efficiency reforms that might be coming. At the risk of sounding too pithy, in each of your worlds, where do you see an opportunity to maybe talk to that office, the new administration, say, hey, we understand you're looking for efficiencies, reforms. Here's an area that, you could sick the DOGE on if you want to go down that path. Doug?
I guess what I would say is, you've been hearing from both the guys who work for the Defense Department up here about the opportunity for rapid reform, and there are a few of those things that have to do with the intersection with Congress, between the administration and Congress, where I think we get to a much more symbiotic speed relationship. For example, these portfolios of record. I'd love to go after something like that. And then there are a whole set of places where there are silly, stupid, bureaucratic, don't have to be there things that slow down a lot of what we're talking about, getting after, that I think are ripe for somebody going through and helping to clean that out so we can go much, much, much faster. Which leads me to kind of one other quick point that I want to make since we're closing off, which is the way we're thinking about risk. We didn't really talk about here, but I think one of the most fundamental things that we've got to do here is think differently about risk. And when I came home from Iraq, Afghanistan, quite a while ago, I realized that most of what I'd spent my entire career thinking of as risk it was uncertainty in the private sector. We are dangerously close to protecting ourselves against the wrong kind of risks and translating that into real risk, which is risk to mission, risk to force, strategic nation, risk to the nation. So we've got to change our approach to risk and the way we talk about it.
Chris?
Efficiency is a good thing. I think we're all looking for opportunities, and I think that's got to be our general posture. I would balance it with capability, the capabilities that we're all bringing to bear, as well, given the threat environment that we're in.
Colonel George?
I'm all in favor of it. We've been on, we don't have a nickname for it or anything, but we've been on talking about process innovation in the Army for the last year, and if it doesn't make us more lethal or our teams more cohesive, we have to be looking at, should we be doing it? So I think we have to review everything that we're doing in that light. And again, I think that the tough thing is going to be, we also need to be flexible with our government workforce, and that has been that's going to be a challenge, but we're going to have to make some, adjustments even as we do that on acquisition and how big those teams are, and as we give things to industry. And some of these changes are going to be hard, but I think we have to make them.
Dan?
So having gone through this once when I was inside the government, I was a lawyer at the Securities and Exchange Commission, and they did a reform initiative, and one of those was to take out a layer and a half, almost 2 layers of sort of bureaucracy in the middle layer. And it turned out we actually ended up bringing more cases faster. So I'm welcoming any targeted efforts to help make the U.S. government more efficient. I know it's going to be hard.
Senator King, last word.
I think a program looking for efficiency is good. I think we should be doing that periodically on a regular basis. My only concern is when you use the term efficiency to talk about programmatic programs that may have a policy. In other words, efficiency is one thing, policy is something else. For example, what if they say, well, the Sentinel program is too expensive? There's a lot of thought and policy that goes into maintaining the 3 legs of the nuclear triad, and I'm not sure the cost should be necessarily the driving factor. Do you see what I mean? I don't mind Mr. Musk or others who are looking at efficiency and saying, why do you have all those layers, those kinds of things? That's fine. But I think there's a danger that they're implicitly or maybe explicitly going to be making policy decisions. We don't need to be doing this anymore. I think that's a decision for Congress to make.
Well, I feel like I learned a lot. I appreciate everyone chiming in here and this absolutely fantastic panel. Please join me in giving them a hand.